Welcome to our Common Unity NAC meeting today. And we're very excited to have a special guest. We're going to have the recording. Those of you who can't make it are going to be able to hear the recording. My regret is you won't be here to ask the questions. This frustrates me. So as you're listening to the recording, jot down your questions. Let's get them in, and we'll have Janna answer them as soon as possible. And then we'll maybe add it to this recording or something, or have two links right together so that we'll link the answers in with this recording. So this is June 20th, 2023, and we have a special guest today. Linda, why don't you go ahead and take a minute, unmute, and introduce the guest.
Hi, Janna. I am so excited about this meeting. And so when so many people couldn't be here tonight, I realized how attached I was because I've worked with so many recovering addicts, I've not been in love with cannabis until I heard this woman talk about the healing that when cannabis is used correctly can bring, and I'm always about healing. So thank you, Janna, from the bottom of my heart. It's a pleasure to have you here, and I hope you come back and teach us again. So I'm going to turn the time over to you. And Steve, did you make her a host so that she can do whatever she needs to do?
Yeah, I think we got it. And thank you so much, Linda, for that introduction. And I'm happy to share. This is a subject of great passion for me. And I just appreciate that you guys are so receptive to learning. And I'm happy to come back anytime. So thank you for that open invitation. My name is Janna Champagne. I am a diplomate of medical cannabinoid science. I'm also a bachelor level nurse, recently retired my license for various reasons, mostly around unethical practices of my state board of nursing. And so kind of in boycott of that. And so my journey really began very organically in the cannabis industry. I became a cannabis patient who happened to be a nurse after suffering a complete health collapse in 2012. And had some really amazing health outcomes as a result of choosing cannabis as an alternative to opioid pain medications to manage my chronic pain issues that are ongoing today. In addition to alleviating my pain and keeping me from starting on that long-term opioid pathway, which, you know, as nurses, we see the late stage outcomes of this for patients. And I was very motivated to avoid that. So it did that for me, but it also did some really profound things like lift my brain fog and reduce my brain inflammation and reverse my autoimmune lupus markers, which of course is unheard of. So this made me really do a deep dive into some of the research I'm going to share with you today. It's also noteworthy that I'm a special needs mom. I have a 21-year-old daughter with autism who has also benefited greatly from cannabis therapy. And so these are some of my passion makers, or my health comes, my daughter's outcomes. More recently, in February of this year, my husband fell off a roof and broke himself up pretty well and had surgery and was able to get off the opioids just 2 weeks after some major surgical interventions using cannabis. So there's a third health outcome that I need to add to this slide. And so I'm very passion driven, and all of these roles that I'm fulfilling today, and you can find out more information on my Media Kit website that's listed there, have come very organically just by following patient needs. And my first role was a patient and then a grower and a caregiver. So I've really gotten to know this plant in a very real way, being a grower and really getting to know the plant through its plant phases and for what it is, which is it really is a gift to humanity that we have this plant that provides such immense healing potential. So these are some of my current cannabis industry roles. I started a nonprofit autism Safe Haven, which is committed to creating cannabis inclusive autism care resources, which really don't exist. I'm big into patient and legislative advocacy, and we have Ryan's Law in Oregon legislative session this year, SB 3567, which would protect patients' right to access cannabis while hospitalized. So we're trying to be really progressive here. I'm also still shaking cages at the Oregon State Board of Nursing, trying to get them to comply with our basic medical ethics and our nursing oaths that we have taken to serve patients without discrimination or prejudice. So even in Oregon, where cannabis has been legal 25 years, we still have some really profound issues. I'm also into medical cannabis certification and product development, very committed to products that are honoring the original profile of the cannabis flower. And also helping patients find symptom targeted formulas. And you'll hear me talk today about how we ensure optimal therapeutic quality products for our patients. And I launched a business called Cannabis Nurse Approved, cannabisnurseapproved.com, if you'd like to read more about that or see the list of products that we promote. I'm also big into medical professional cannabis education. This was a pivot I made in 2019 when my Oregon State Board of Nursing decided to put a gag order on nurses' education of cannabis patients, even though we fulfill a really vital role in helping guide patients and educate them and provide them informed consent and allow them to proceed in a really medically optimal manner. And avoid pharmaceutical interactions, for example, is one of the big roles of nurses. And so I pivoted and I have accredited content for nurses through Cannabis Nurses Network. I'm also currently a college professor since 2020, teaching in a master's degree, integrative medicine degree program that has a cannabinoid science concentration at John Patrick University. And prior to that, when I was allowed to, up till 2019, I focused on patient education, and I've served thousands of patients into guiding them to optimize their cannabis therapy outcomes through a really medically sound approach and having that medical intent, which we're going to talk a lot about today. I'm a clinical application specialist. I do free nurse guidance on hotlines and oversee and train nurses now to do that. I'm also an author. I've written a lot of articles and contributed to books, and you can find all of that on my website as well. This link here is to my daughter's story, which you'll see on the right, which published on the cover of a mainstream magazine in 2017. It sold at Barnes and Noble nationwide. So that was sort of my coming out of the cannabis closet. And you'll notice I was still calling myself a holistic nurse before that published. And once that published, I officially had come out of the closet as a cannabis nurse. So that's kind of when that shift happened. So first and foremost, I just want to review some of the common misconceptions I'm hoping to target today in our education module here. And one of the major misconceptions by medical professionals specifically is that cannabis is a snake oil or a fix-all. And this is because they hear from patients and people in the community that cannabis is good for a lot of different illnesses. And what they don't understand is that the way cannabis works in our system and our body, it actually promotes homeostasis or optimal health balance in every other system of the body. And so this can really explain why cannabis can be beneficial for such a wide variety of conditions, from cancer to autism to autoimmune to chronic pain to mental health. We have research, more than 35,000 studies supporting cannabis for all of those uses. And we'll dig deeper into all of these topics. Number two, that cannabis meets the criteria for federal Schedule I placement. THC specifically is still Schedule I placed, even though it's been objectively proven not to meet the 3 criteria for Schedule I placement. And this is really what restricts and makes THC unlawful at the federal level. And this is why, we're really dependent on individual states passing legalization legislation in order to provide patient access to THC. Is based on this Schedule I placement. So the fact that and I'll talk about the actual court hearing a little bit later, but we have objectively proven that cannabis is not highly addictive physically. In fact, it's considered less addictive than physically than sugar and caffeine. That it has profound medical uses. Like I said, 35,000. These are reputable articles and journals that have been published about the benefits of cannabinoid medicine. And that number 3, it is harmful. And in the contrary, we've proven that cannabis has this unsurpassed safety profile. We've used it a very long time as humans. Number 3, that cannabis use always changes baseline motivation and can decrease function. Now, THC certainly has this potential, but with an optimal medical approach, the goal is actually improved function. And that's a really reasonable goal. With the patients I've worked with, most of them saw improved function, improved quality of life, and reduction of pharmaceuticals as a result of integrating cannabis into their regimen. So that's just what we really see more often than not when they have appropriate guidance. Number 4, patients don't require medical oversight. Well, I kind of started into this already, but we actually have research that shows that patients have improved cannabis therapy outcomes when they have knowledgeable guidance to help them avoid things like pharmaceutical interactions that might impair their outcomes, for example. And knowing what products are supported for their condition and understanding the possible risks and benefits of cannabis use for them as an individual. That takes an assessment process done by a medical professional. And number 5, that daily cannabis use is automatically a problem and that it warrants cannabis use disorder label, which is a DSM criteria, meaning that DSM is a list of criteria to label somebody with a condition. And so this actually is in the DSM, and we're actually fighting this in Oregon right now because daily use is actually a benefit to many patients that have what we call endocannabinoid deficiency. And we'll get much deeper into this topic as well. But I just wanted to kind of give you some things to chew on as we move through all of this. And so, little overview of the presentation. We're going to touch on the history of medical cannabis. I used to not be much of a history buff, but lately I am just digging right into it on many fronts, legislatively, politically and medically. And it really does tell a tale that we should hear and that we should really be paying close attention to as we're making decisions and moving forward in our society. There's much to be learned here. We're going to talk about the endocannabinoid system anatomy. This is the system in our body. We're going to talk about the various cannabinoid sources. It's not just the cannabis plant that gives us cannabinoids. We're going to talk about some of the clinical implications and applications that could potentially improve human health with appropriate cannabis use. We're going to talk about the optimal medical approach and that intent and the importance of that. We're going to talk about some of the commonly sourced cannabinoids that you might find if you walk into a dispensary or look online into a company that sells cannabinoid products. And we're also going to talk about terpenes, which are another compound in cannabis that are very important to pay attention to. And so the history of medical cannabis, we have evidence, 5,000 years and possibly even earlier that humans began to use cannabis as medicine. The first really solid recorded use was in Chinese medicine, but we have evidence that cannabis has been used by every major culture worldwide, and that it has historically is a safe and effective remedy for dozens of indications or diseases. And so, knowing that this is such an integral part of our evolution as humanity, and that we have this vast history of cannabis use, and we know it's safe and effective. In fact, to this day, we don't have a death attributed solely to cannabis. That's how safe it is. Now, we can't say that about coffee. We can't say that about sugar. We can't say that about caffeine. We can't say that about tobacco, but we can say that about cannabis. So it is pretty profound how unsurpassed its safety profile is. In the early 1900s, cannabis was listed in the US Pharmacopoeia. That is the book of all possible medications that are available. And there were more than 2,000 preparations of cannabis listed in the pharmacopoeia by over 280 manufacturers. So it was widespread as our mainstream medicine in the early 1900s. What stopped this trend of more than 5,000 years in 1937 was the Marijuana Tax Act, which made cannabis so expensive that it was really prohibitive for most of the population to access it. Interestingly, the American Medical Association objected to passage of this act because they knew the impact it would have on our population. It really spawned medical reliance on chemical pharmaceuticals and synthetics. So it was largely driven by the Rothschilds and their desire to get people on medications that could be patented and that they could really monopolize the profits from. Interestingly, too, the term marijuana, you're not going to hear me use that very much. I know a lot of our state laws use that term marijuana. It's the Oregon Medical Marijuana Program here. The term itself is extraordinarily racist. It was coined in 1937 as a way to, number one, confuse doctors who didn't know cannabis is marijuana. So most doctors didn't realize that marijuana was cannabis until this had already passed, and all of a sudden their patients don't have access anymore. It was also used as a way to stigmatize Mexican Americans and Mexicans, Mary and Juan being really common names in that culture. It was called the demon Mexican weed, and they called it all kinds of crazy things. But marijuana is really a stigma word that we really try to avoid. Cannabis is the taxonomy name for this plant is Cannabis sativa L. And so you'll hear me refer to this plant as cannabis moving forward. And it was in 1970 that President Nixon, being the guy of integrity that he was, that finally placed THC on Schedule 1, even though, as we mentioned earlier, it does not fit any of the criteria. All right, allergies today. So in 1971, we had our first cannabis medical research findings. These outcomes were published in the Journal of American Medical Association. So it's a serious medical journal. This study supported cannabis use for cancer, cachexia, which is that wasting, that malnutrition that a lot of cancer patients suffer, and also for glaucoma, which is a pressure issue in the eye. It was in 1972 as well that the NIH actually did a study on THC and found that it can trigger apoptosis or natural cell death of cancer cells, which is actually targeting the reason people get cancer tumors and have it grow and spread, is that this apoptosis mechanism or the natural cell death turns off when these cells mutate into cancer. So it really is kind of fixing the reason why cancer happens with THC. I have a copy of that if anybody's interested in seeing it. I've got a PDF of it somewhere. In 1976, we had our first legal U.S. cannabis patient since before 1937. Robert Randall was approved for cannabis use to treat, his glaucoma. Interestingly, the United States government supplied his cannabis out of University of Mississippi. And he was kind of considered the founder of the cannabis medical reestablishment movement. In 1980, he founded the Alliance of Cannabis Therapeutics with a focus on national legalization and rescheduling of cannabis, descheduling from Schedule 1. In 1988, they brought their case to a DEA federal judge, Francis Young, who ruled cannabis as medicinal, and he recommended that it be removed from Schedule 1. So at this point, we proved that, number one, cannabis was not harmful, that it had an unsurpassed safety profile. Number two, that it was not physically addictive. Now, physical addiction is classified by the severity of the physical withdrawals when it's stopped, okay? And what they found is that the physical addiction potential of cannabis is very minimal, and it's less so than sugar and coffee, and definitely less than tobacco or alcohol. And so, that really, we've had this conversation in my prior visit with you guys as well, but I do believe there can be a psychological kind of addiction or a potential to utilize cannabis as an escapism tool. So I don't discount that at all, but physical addiction is not a factor here. The third one being that it must have no medical use. And our government, in their great wisdom, actually holds a patent for cannabis as medicine. Is patent number 6630507. And so this just really shows how hypocritical our government is being, having cannabis Schedule 1 placed. And we had an agreement by the DEA judge in 1988 to deschedule it. Of course, his ruling was overturned and the appeals all failed. And cannabis still remains Schedule 1 today. THC remains Schedule 1 today in 2023. This is how many years later? 35, 36 years later that we're still fighting the same fight for justice for patients. It was not until the 1990s, 1991, Prop P actually passed in the city of San Francisco, who at the time was, I lived right near San Francisco when this happened, actually. They were suffering HIV and AIDS crisis, and they were having trouble managing these patients and giving them quality of life with this terminal illness. And what they found is that cannabis was really effective, not only for cancer cachexia and wasting, but also for AIDS cachexia. And they had enough evidence that they took it to the city of San Francisco and they passed Prop P, which legalized medical cannabis for the use in AIDS cachexia treatment. In 1992, we've started seeing some of our first serious research on the endocannabinoid system by Dr. Raphael Mechoulam. He really figured out how cannabis and THC work in our body. And his ongoing research supported the passage of more state laws allowing medical cannabis access. And today, medical cannabis laws protect patients in more than 30 states. It just went up again, so I need to update that number, but we have recreational cannabis laws as well in many other states. So we have patients that can meet certain criteria and be authorized to legally access THC cannabis in their state. And we have other states where they have medical programs, but they also have recreational cannabis laws, which means anybody over the age of 21 can purchase cannabis with a driver's license. They don't need an authorization from a doctor. They don't need any other paperwork. In Oregon, anybody who's 21 or over can grow 4 plants per household with no paperwork at all. So access, although it's beautiful and wonderful, it is not the entire story. And I write a lot about how the recreational laws are beginning to whittle away the medical laws and impact patients negatively as far as affordability and things of that nature. So it's a pro and a con, I believe. So now to dig into our endocannabinoid system. This is part of what Raphael Mechoulam began to discover in 1991. So we have a system in our body, just discovered in 91, that produces endocannabinoids. So these are cannabinoids that our body produces. They're considered vital nutrients for human health. So vital, it's actually argued that life would not be possible without cannabinoids, without endocannabinoids. And the most prolific source of endocannabinoids is human breast milk, which we know is the most nutrient-dense possible food for humans. So these endocannabinoids that we produce float throughout the body, and they bind with endocannabinoid system receptors, which are found in every other system of the body. And so it's really a lot like the endocrine system or hormone system, where it produces these chemicals and it has receptors throughout the body that uptake these chemicals and cause a reaction. So the main role of the endocannabinoid system is to maintain homeostasis or optimal health balance throughout the whole body. One of the main things it does that I think is so high impact for anybody that is suffering the stress of disease or imbalances is that it'll mitigate the stress response. It'll promote the eat, relax, forget, sleep, protect phase that is so important for recovery from illness and imbalances. And we know how much stress really contributes to disease. I think most of us have probably heard that. So the fact that it will mitigate stress is one of the ways that it can be profoundly beneficial. These receptors in our bodies, the two main ones that we found initially were the CB1 receptors and the CB2 receptors. The CB1 receptors are most prolific in the brain and the central nervous system. And the CB2 receptors are found in the immune system, in the gut, and the peripheral organs. So they tend to be more widespread throughout the body. We have since, of course, found dozens of other receptors and pathways that cannabis actually and cannabinoids will interact with in the body. We're still learning. I mean, we still have so much to understand about this plant and these compounds and how they promote our health. So cannabinoid sources, as we talked about, we have endocannabinoids that our bodies produce. One of the reasons why somebody might not be able to produce enough endocannabinoids to remain in homeostasis or optimal health balance is omega-3 or omega-6 fatty acid deficiency, because the precursors to these endocannabinoids we produce are those fatty acids. And of course, with our standard American diet, these fatty acids are largely deficient. So that's one reason why somebody might need to source their cannabinoids from a plant. Luckily, we have plant-sourced cannabinoids through the Cannabis sativa L plant, which produces more than 100 cannabinoids. And actually, I think last count is 165 plus. We're still discovering more every day. And also, we have some fungal plants that actually produce mycocannabinoids as well. Now, these plant-sourced phyto or mycocannabinoids have the same mechanism of action and very, very similar structure to the endocannabinoids that we produce in our bodies. So, for example, from a phytocannabinoid of THC from the cannabis flower, it will act just like the endocannabinoid we produce called anandamide. They're both CB1 agonists. The body can scarcely differentiate between the two. It responds the same way. Anandamide, I believe, has a little bit shorter duration of action for those of you that want to pick this apart. That's the main way that they differ. Same thing with phytocannabinoid or plant-sourced CBD and endocannabinoid or internally produced 2-arachidonyl glycerol. Same thing. They're both CB1 and CB2 antagonists. They work the same way in the body. The body doesn't really differentiate between the two. So once again, it's very anti-intuitive that here we are restricting compounds that our own bodies produce that are vital nutrients for human health. Most prolific source of anandamide is human breast milk. It's meant to give babies stress management. It's meant to help them be hungry. It's meant to help calm any stress they have. So very, very important. And so there is a new condition that has been coined by Dr. Ethan Russo called endocannabinoid system deficiency. So endocannabinoid deficiency, it basically means that a person cannot produce enough endocannabinoids internally to maintain homeostasis throughout their body, which is that optimal health balance. Now, when you consider that the underlying cause of all disease or illness is underlying imbalances, like I said, this explains the potentially huge impact of replenishing cannabinoids in our system. It's interesting because endocannabinoid deficiency it's a condition found in all chronic illnesses per Dr. Ethan Russo. It can also result in systemic imbalances. And chronic imbalances can deplete your endocannabinoids because your body's trying to produce enough to keep up with your imbalances. But if your imbalances are severe enough, your body depletes in its attempts to do that. And so the causes of endocannabinoid deficiency include chronic illness, but it can also cause chronic illness. So it's really this downward spiral, can be worsened by certain genetic mutations that prohibit ample production or uptake of cannabinoids. Environmental exposures that are causing stress on your body can also deplete your endocannabinoids. So there's a lot of reasons why somebody might be deficient here. And the way that we know that somebody has endocannabinoid deficiency is if they have a chronic illness. That's where Ethan Russo put those two pieces together. Endocannabinoid signaling is the primary function of the endocannabinoid system to promote homeostasis. And so when we have cannabinoids, whether they be internally produced or supplemented from the plant, if somebody can't produce enough, they interact with the cannabinoid receptors throughout the body and promote balance. And here it's a chemical signaling system similar to the endocrine system, modulates and balances processes in the body, and directly impacts every other system, whether it be the immune and the gut, those CB2 receptors, or the central nervous system, those CB1 receptors. Although there is a caveat, the body will actually upregulate CB2 receptors in the nervous system if there's inflammation present. So it's really interesting how learning this information and how to work with patients really entails just listening to what their bodies are saying. And if they're upregulating CB2 receptors, those CB2 receptors are like begging for something to come and interact with them, right? And so knowing which compounds will do that is how we help guide patients to reaching what might be most beneficial for them. In the central nervous system too, for any of you that are scientifically minded and want to do a little bit of digging, recommend looking at retrograde signaling. This is one of the ways that cannabis very uniquely interacts in the neurological system with the neurotransmitters. It has a feedback mechanism that allows it to assess what's happening with the neurotransmitters in the brain. And then it can do retrograde signaling if needed to improve that balance. And this is a mechanism that we don't see with any other compound. No other medications, no other therapies can provide this retrograde signaling. It's unique only to cannabis. So it's a pretty interesting way to start looking at what it does in the brain. Pretty cool. Very intelligent. So when the endocannabinoid system is activated by cannabinoids, whether internally or from the plant, it can improve endocannabinoid deficiency. And we have a study, it was done by Dr. Bonnie Goldstein. She's one of my medical advisory board members for Autism Safe Haven. She just did a research study that exemplifies this on autism. And they found biomarkers in autism that are linked with endocannabinoid deficiency. And she did a cohort of her patients. They did a baseline or a pre-therapy assessment of these biomarkers for endocannabinoid deficiency in these kids with autism, and then treated with cannabis, and then looked at the biomarkers after treatment and saw an improvement. So that was a pretty cool study to look at as well by Dr. Bonnie Goldstein. And so it really explains why cannabinoid therapy is such a vital nutrient for health, because it promotes balance. And that's really what our body is always after, is to be in a state of balance. Explains why cannabinoid therapy may provide relief from symptoms of so many different diseases. And this list here is just scratching the surface of what the research actually supports, not to mention patient outcomes, which I feel are even more profound than what the research can reflect at this point. But we have multiple sclerosis or autoimmune, cancer, autism, chronic Lyme, chronic pain, diabetes, mental health, neurological disorders, and skeletal system issues. And you can see all of those kind of exemplified on this photo off to the right. And if this interests you and you want to learn more, I highly recommend the book by Uwe Bleching. It's called Cannabis Health Index, and it actually walks through the research on each of these systems regarding cannabis and the various cannabinoids that are available and how they might benefit these issues. So it's a great resource. This is an example of just a few of the pathways now that we have discovered that cannabis can interact with, and some of the outcomes it can have. Now, what's interesting about this chart is that the cannabinoids that are listed here, none of them are Schedule 1, and none of them are intoxicating whatsoever. So none of these have that risk of potential escapism or psychological addiction, like we talk about it being a risk with THC. So you can see, you know, anxiety, psychosis, epilepsy, for just basic neuroprotection, vasorelaxant, so this can help blood pressure, antispasmodic, so reducing muscle spasms, anti-ischemic, so post-stroke, if somebody has had a stroke, they are suffering ischemia, meaning their brain is not getting enough oxygen. And ischemia is just lack of oxygen to any area in the body. But stroke is a good example of how, you know, CBD might benefit as an anti-ischemic through the 5-HT1A pathway. Anti-proliferative and anti-cancer, anti-emetic, so it can help with nausea. Antibacterial, CBD has been shown to kill MRSA, where antibiotics from pharmaceuticals are failing. Anti-diabetic, it can help to balance blood sugars. It's good for psoriasis. It's good for intestinal health. It can help balance the gut. Analgesic, which is pain. CBD interacts with the TRPV1 pathway in the body, which is a major pain pathway. And it does so in a way that's safe, which is really important, especially when you look at the pharmaceutical research on TRPV1, that they've tried to manipulate this pathway, and the outcomes include patients completely losing their pain response, which can lead to them burning themselves and not feeling it, or being hurt otherwise and not feeling it. So really, you know, we haven't quite figured out how to modulate this pain pathway in the way that CBD can do with all of our human ego and knowledge. Nature is so amazing, isn't it? As a bone stimulant, we're seeing benefits of CBD for those that have osteopenia or osteoporosis and they're losing bone mass as they age. As an anti-inflammatory through the TNF pathway, profoundly anti-inflammatory. Immunosuppressive of the T cells. This is part of how cannabis can help with things like autoimmune, is they're suppressing the immune system, but it does so in a way that doesn't have the horrific side effects of pharmaceutical immunosuppressives. Prednisone and methotrexate are two that I was on for lupus that have horrific side effects, including death. CBD has an unsurpassed safety profile, and it can be just as potent of an immunosuppressive. And then we have THCV, which is good for those that need metabolic support or bone stimulation, epilepsy. CBG as an anti-proliferative against cancer, antibacterial, MRSA, bone stimulant, CBC. So you can see, you know, some of these we still have not figured out what pathway they use. We have evidence that these compounds can help with these issues that it points to, but you can see the pathways are still blank. So it also just exemplifies that we humbly need to recognize that we still don't know everything about this plant. We still don't know how it works on our body completely, or what benefits it still has to offer. We do know it has an unsurpassed safety profile, so that makes it a great candidate for research and for human trials, which currently are being restricted, unfortunately. So optimal medical approach and intent, I feel like, is so important. One of my students, and she's also a nurse that I have mentored for a couple of years, she just began doing workshops to help people set their intention before a cannabis therapy session. And they're seeing really profound outcomes with this. She does the same thing with psilocybin and psychedelics. And she finds that the intent going into it can really, you know, profoundly influence the experience and the benefits that a patient receives. Part of an optimal medical approach is assessment by a knowledgeable medical professional. And, you know, the NCSBN guidelines, it's the National Council State Boards of Nursing Guidelines for medical marijuana by nurses, actually dictates that nurses go through this process with their patients, assess their needs before writing the care plan to meet those individual needs, individual approach. And every individual patient can have different considerations. Their priorities and goals for the cannabis therapy may differ. For example, you might have two patients that both have cancer. One of them is closer to end of life and they've succumbed to that and they're comfortable with that and ready to let go and pass over. Well, that care plan is going to look very different from a patient with cancer that wants to fight it with everything they have and wants to fight for their life. The patient that is ready to pass over and relinquish to that and is at peace with that. What we can do for them is help them be more comfortable. We can help them eat. We can make sure they're not starving to death, that they're, their pain is managed, their anxiety is managed, that they're not gorked out on morphine and benzodiazepines, so that they can actually be awake and spending quality time with their family, in those last moments of their life. The patient with that wants to fight for their life, they're going to be on very intensive dosing of cannabinoids, hundreds of milligrams a day, where the standardized dose that the CDC decided is 10 milligrams a day. So cancer patients that want the anti-tumor effects are sometimes taking between 100 and 300 milligrams a day of THC. So very different approach. We want to look at what pharmaceuticals they're taking, because there can be interactions, especially with CBD, which of course anybody can buy today at a gas station throughout the US. And most people have no knowledge that CBD uses a really common liver pathway for metabolism that may interact with pharmaceuticals. For example, any pharmaceuticals that come with the warning to avoid grapefruit may interact with CBD. And that includes warfarin, which is a blood thinner, which CBD can make stronger. It includes things like SSRIs, which CBD may potentiate or make stronger, that could lead to some really adverse effects of that combination for a patient. So there's that pharmaceutical interactions, I believe, are the primary risk factor of cannabis therapy. And it's one that luckily is easily avoided, but only if a patient knows that maybe they should have their pharmaceutical screened before starting cannabis, which is not common knowledge, unfortunately. This is some of the stuff I'm shaking cages about in Oregon, is that we don't have good medical support for our patients using cannabis. There can be health and genetic factors that we want to assess and make sure that we're considering, the possible impact of those for a patient. And we've started to kind of tiptoe into genetically guided cannabis therapy. And so we can actually look at a patient's genetics and how that might impact how cannabis interacts in their system and work around that with them. We want to look at condition. What is the research support for their condition? Are there any lifespan concerns? For example, THC use in childhood and adolescence can be a risk. Now, oftentimes, if a parent is seeking THC for their child, that child's condition is often far more severe than any possible risk concerns from using THC. Sometimes not, but we're thinking cancer, we're thinking autism with self-injury and zero quality of life, where we have the potential to improve that with THC. And realistically, with children, the risk is schizophrenia. And so we do assess for family history of schizophrenia or genetic predisposition to schizophrenia. And that is a contraindication where we say no THC for you. So we do assess that. We look at strain-specific implications, and this is where we're looking at the profile, with 165 cannabinoids, over 200 terpenes, you mix and match those, it's almost like limitless combinations are possible. And we can really hone that in and look for specific strains or cultivars that might best meet the needs of a specific patient and their goals. The main contraindication, like I said, is schizophrenia risk. Although there can be a cannabis allergy, it is exceedingly rare. I've only seen it one time in all my years working with cannabis patients. So those are kind of some of the things we look at when we're assessing a patient's situation, before they start the cannabis therapy, ideally. Other considerations include the client location. Unfortunately, THC is not available to everybody legally in the United States. You have to be in a state that has a legal THC program, because cannabis is still Schedule I, and so it's illegal federally. We want to make sure we're managing any contraindications a patient might have or any risk factors around cannabis use. Lifestyle and routine considerations. So this is a big one. This is helping patients understand what regimen might be optimal. And with the medical approach, we're always trying to improve quality of life, improve function, reduce reliance on pharmaceuticals and the horrible side effects that often come with that. And so sometimes it's about teaching patients that if you're driving during the day, if you're going to work, if you're picking up kids from school, you probably want to just stick with the non-intoxicating compounds during the day and save the intoxicating cannabis compounds for at night. For, that way you can sleep through those effects and still get the medical benefits of them. So we always help patients kind of determine how to manage that regimen most effectively, and screening for those contraindications as well. And then from that, we do an assessment, we do a nursing diagnosis, and we write a care plan for this patient. And the care plan is basically targeted education, matching the cannabinoid and terpene profile to the client's needs and helping really reduce the length of their experimentation that's needed to find the product that works for them and the regimen that works. Doing general cannabis therapy education, kind of like I'm doing with you today, making sure they understand the various routes of administration. We can, the best one for starting out, in my opinion, is using tinctures, which is a cannabis concentrate that's been diluted down into an oil. Really, really easy to dose. You can literally count the number of drops and know how many milligrams you're taking. And as a nurse, that is very motivating for me because that helps my patients to chart what they're taking, teaching them to journal. This was my pain level before I took my medicine. This was my pain level afterwards. This is what I took. This is how many milligrams I took. It makes it duplicatable for them. So next time they have that symptom, they say, oh, this is what worked. I'm going to try that again. Or I'm going to take a little more or a little less, depending on how they responded the first time. It really gives them a way to proceed in a well-informed manner. And then, of course, mitigating the risk of pharmaceutical interactions, I think, is just so profoundly important. I think this is where we're really missing the bar when it comes to upholding our foundational medical ethics in serving patients and ensuring they have informed consent and they have patient autonomy and the ability to utilize what they wish. Those are basic medical ethics that we have owed to uphold with our patients. And so the flow criteria is one of the things I began teaching patients after working with them for several years. And being a grower myself and knowing the plant and working with the plant and making medicines, all different sorts of products from the plant, I got pretty familiar with its potential. And then when I entered the industry officially and began educating and counseling patients, I would have patients come to me that had already started a product and they were problem solving. They weren't happy with it and something was off and they weren't quite getting it and it wasn't the right product or the right dose, or they were combining it with pharma. And I noticed this trend that cannabis products that are produced in various manners are not all created equal. We have producers that are concentrating the flower as nature intended and really trying to honor the hundreds of compounds found in the cannabis flower. And then we have producers with their big human egos thinking they can improve upon the perfection of nature and stripping away a bunch of compounds and making it cleaner and advertising that it's, better medicine when really what they're doing is stripping away medical benefits with those compounds. And so we have like CO2 processing, which would take the flower from hundreds of compounds down to a dozen or 2 dozen. We have isolation, which would actually take it down to just one compound. That's what the pharmaceutical companies are doing with cannabis, unfortunately. And what the research supports is that when we have that whole plant spectrum in a cannabis product, it is going to help patients have their most optimal medical outcomes of their cannabis therapy. And so this is when my nurses and I came up with the flow criteria to teach patients what to seek when they're going out into this big cannabis market and doing eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Look for medical quality. This is the criteria. Flower derived. This means we don't want hemp biomass with all the stalks and the stems and the leaves. We want flower derived medicine. That's where all of the good stuff is. We want it lab tested. This helps us know the potency so that we can dose accurately. It also rules out any chemical residuals from processing, any mold that might be there from the curing process or poor storage, any other residuals that might be harmful are ruled out with lab testing. So it's potency and purity, very important, because if we have chemical solvents left over in the product, if we have mold in the product, if we have other chemicals, fertilizers, any of that stuff, pesticides, those could negatively impact a patient that's already sick. Very important. Of course, organic is so vital to make sure that we're not adding toxins to a patient's body when they're already sick. And then whole plant, that's what I've already talked about pretty much at length. And if you want to learn more about the research comparing whole plant with the stripped down compounds of cannabis and CBD, I have my research article on the topic that is linked here, and on the bibliography page on the last page of your notes, you should be able to just click that link and open it right up and read it if you'd like. So it's all in there. And what the research does say is that whole plant cannabis, when compared, worked just as well at 25 to 30% of the dose of isolate. So that represents pretty profound cost savings for patients, because most products they charge by the milligram. So if somebody can get by on a quarter of the milligrams and get the same outcome, that's really huge. The other thing the research says is that when you take an isolate, it works very differently in the body versus the whole plant. There's a synergy and a wisdom to really honoring the whole plant and the entourage effect and how it synergistically is more beneficial than the sum of its parts. Very gestalt in its theory. And what it says is isolate, as you're increasing the dose of an isolate CBD, at some point it actually falls off, it stops working. Where the whole plant, as you increase it, the effect increases. It doesn't have that drop off. And so when you're thinking of these patients with autoimmune or cancer that are needing pretty intensive and high dose cannabinoid therapy, if they're taking an isolate, they could be on the right side of that bell curve and be paying a whole lot of money to take hundreds of cannabinoids a day, milligrams, and be getting little to no benefit. So it can literally make or break somebody's outcome to receive the right quality of product. Huge, huge, huge. So these are some of the most commonly sourced cannabinoids. And so these, when I became a patient in 2013, 2014, all that was available in Oregon, where it's been legal since 1998, was THCA and THC. That was it. So the industry in a decade has grown astronomically. Luckily, these were things that worked well for me, and I happened onto strains and grower friends that knew their stuff and knew what strain I needed for pain. THCA is the acid form of THC, meaning that it's raw. It has not been heated. THCA is not intoxicating. I make THCA tincture to this day by taking dry cured cannabis flower, and you can just soak it in a substrate. I use organic extra virgin olive oil, and it will infuse into the oil as THCA. Because it's raw, unless you heat it, it's not intoxicating at all. THCA is a powerful anti-inflammatory. It boasts twice the strength of prednisone, or 12 times that of aspirin per the research, with no side effects. So when you compare, prednisone, which is half as potent, and the side effects of prednisone, which can include mania, insomnia, It can include, with long-term use, skin and organ fragility, meaning your skin and the skin around your organs can tear. Versus THCA, when you do that objective risk versus benefit assessment, THCA would seem to be the obvious first line of defense for patients suffering inflammation. I mean, you could do that with just about any of these compounds. Risk versus benefit in cannabis is usually the first logical resort for these patients. And then we come to THC, which of course is the most infamous. It is intoxicating. It is a federal Schedule I drug, even though it meets 0 of the criteria. THC does have viable medical uses. For me, THC and its ability to reduce the T cell activity in the immune system, I credit THC for reversing my autoimmune lupus. CBD wasn't even available when that happened on the market here. It was THC and THCA that did that for me. THC can also be beneficial for sleep support, good for pain, good for stress support. It can be an amnesiac. So it can really help with people that have suffered stress or trauma in the past and are suffering from PTSD. You know, THC, if you look at any of the veterans and how they're speaking out about cannabis for PTSD, it is life-sparing for those that would otherwise, you know, go the way of 39 veterans per day committing suicide. And then we have CBD. So CBD has the most indications, it has the most research, many uses, and thanks to the 2018 Hemp Act federally, CBD became legal in all states overnight when they passed that. CBD was basically descheduled from Schedule I. So it makes it very accessible, even in non-legal states. People can get CBD. It is not intoxicating at all. It's extremely antimicrobial. We have research supporting that it will kill MRSA. I personally had a patient with a Marcon's infection in her gut. She had been suffering with it about 18 months when she called me. They had tried every antibiotic and every other intervention, and it was still ongoing. She started on some CBD, and in 6 weeks, the Marcon's infection was cleared up. So the patient outcomes are also evidence, in my opinion. We don't have any research saying CBD might benefit a patient with a Marcon's infection, but there you go. We have outcomes supporting it. It's good for pain, that TRPV1 pathway we talked about. It's supported as an anxiolytic. It can help balance the GABA in the brain that can, when it's depleted, can cause anxiety. It can help with depression. CBD works a lot like the SSRI pharmaceuticals for depression, the serotonin uptake inhibitors. It's immune modulating, meaning it can really help to balance the immune function. It can regulate blood sugar, so it can be wonderful for diabetes and helping to reduce reliance on diabetes medications, which have horrible side effects. As an anti-cancer, it can help to block the GPR55 pathway, which cancer relies upon to grow and spread. So it's such a great answer. Anti-seizure, antipsychotic, it's great for schizophrenia. So once again, if you have a patient that has schizophrenia, even though THC is probably not an option for them at all, CBD may help as an antipsychotic for them. So, and you can see over here, there's kind of a summary comparison of the different activity of THC and THCA and CBD. And a lot of this is coming out of one of my textbooks for my college course, which is Curious About Cannabis by Jason Wilson. I happen to have it right here, so I'll hold it up. Great book, very scientifically rigorous. So it's not a fun read, but boy, is it packed full of information. And once again, there's a link to that in the bibliography as well, if you want to purchase it. I have somebody in the chat. I just want to see if there's a question. No, Stephen. Okay. And then we have CBGA, which is relatively new on the market. It's interesting because we have discovered that CBGA in the cannabis flower is the stem cell cannabinoid, from which almost every other cannabinoid is produced. So CBD, THC, CBC, CBN. We did find a second stem cell cannabinoid that produced.
Sorry, Janet, you're gonna have to unmute yourself. Someone came in, I tried to mute them and it got you.
Oh, it's okay. How do I need to go back and cover something? Where did it stop?
Start about, 3 sentences ago.
Okay. So I'll go back to the top just to be sure. So the CBGA is our cannabinoid stem cell. The CBGA is produced first in the cannabis flower, and it's the stem cell from which almost every other cannabinoid is produced. There is an exception. We just have learned in the last year or so that there's a second cannabinoid stem cell called CBGVA that produces the varin cannabinoids, which would be the THCV and the CBDV, which are showing a lot. They're non-intoxicating, showing a lot of benefits for diabetes, weight loss, epilepsy, seizures. But most of the cannabinoids in the flower come from CBGA. And we can get this by harvesting early before the CBGA begins to turn into these other cannabinoids. And all of that is dictated by the plant's genetics as far as what the CBGA turns into. We don't have a ton of research on the medical benefits of CBGA quite yet. We do have evidence supporting it's a really profound anti-inflammatory, kind of like the THCA. All of the acids seem to have that anti-inflammatory benefit through the TNF alpha pathway. So that would be my guess is what we're going to find more about with the CBGA. CBGA, when it's heated, the acid molecule falls off, just like with the THCA. And all of these have different thresholds at which the acid is removed, as far as the temperature that's required to what we call decarboxylate and remove that acid. But CBGA, when heated, turns into CBG or cannabigerol. Cannabigerol has only been on the market for about 3 or 4 years now, so pretty recently available. It's a CB2 agonist, which makes it great for targeting gut and immune imbalances. We talked about how those CB2 receptors are most prolific in the gut and immune system. It's also a powerful anti-inflammatory and anti-proliferative. And there was research that just came out in the last few years that supports the combination of CBD and CBG for inflammation, that the combination actually potentiates and strengthens the anti-inflammatory effect of either one alone. So we see more of that synergy happening with addition, when we combine those two cannabinoids specifically. We have CBN or cannabinol, which is also more newly available just in the last couple of years. It's indicated for sleep support. It has a profound sedating effect. It is considered intoxicating, yet it's legal under the Hemp Act. So don't ask me why they drew that line there, but they did. CBN is actually a degradation product of THC. So in the flower, you start with the CBGA. It goes to THCA, which then turns into THC when you heat it. And when THC degrades, it becomes CBN, and it degrades with oxidation by, exposure to air or by exposure to UV light or by heat. So really interesting the way, we can manipulate, and we're learning to manipulate and make these different products.
Janna, what about with other drugs or pharmaceuticals?
As far as
that dissipation and destructuring that you just talked about?
It's a completely different process. It's not a natural process with pharmaceuticals. It's often either completely synthetic or semi-synthetic, meaning that, it's either a chemical cocktail they produce or a natural product that they've subjected to a chemical cocktail to produce something. And there are cannabis products that are synthetic or semi-synthetic, and I don't recommend those. Probably the most infamous that you may have all heard of is D8 THC. D8 THC is intoxicating. It is legal under the Hemp Act. So a lot of these states that don't have legal THC access have kind of jumped on that bandwagon. but the way they produce it, it's very, very toxic. And D8 THC being a semi-synthetic, meaning they start with CBD and they expose it to a chemical cocktail to come up with D8 THC. It's harmed a lot of people, unfortunately, and we haven't done safety testing on, the human manipulation of cannabinoids at all. And so really we're kind of using our population as experiment subjects with some of these compounds. And DHTHC was actually taken off of the market in Oregon last year after we reportedly have over 100 hospitalizations linked with D8-THC use. So once again, I always revert back to the wisdom of nature, the wisdom of this sacred plant and this gift to humanity, and that we can fully recognize that we don't know everything about this plant or how it works in the body or what benefits it might elucidate. Yet with our human egos, we think we can improve upon the perfection of nature. And really what they're doing, because you can't patent a whole plant, a lot of it is profit driven. A lot of it is with the intent that they can produce a unique compound that then they can patent, and then they can monopolize all of the profits from selling that product. And that's not in the best interest of patients. So from a medical ethics standpoint, it's a no-go, right?
Okay, so Janna, I'm going to jump in. You said that the U.S. government had patented cannabis at the beginning and actually gave a patent number. What does that have to do with what you just said?
So they patented cannabis as a neuroprotective under patent number 6630507. So it was a specific compound that they patented, an isolate form, which is why they could patent it. It mostly just reflects the great hypocrisy of Schedule I placement, because one of the criteria for Schedule I placement is it must not have any medical benefits. And here we have our government recognizing its medical benefits in a patent. So it's like it doesn't have medical benefits for Schedule I purposes. To be placed Schedule I, the other things on there are methamphetamine and heroin and these deadly drugs, right? That meet all three of those criteria: addictive, harmful, no medical use. So they're supposed to meet all three to be Schedule I placed. And cannabis meets 0 of the 3. We've proven it in court on a federal level. There it is. Profit driven. Profit driven means logic goes out the window. It's what I'm learning. Did that answer your question, Steve? And I'm happy if anyone else wants to jump in and ask questions, it's fine too.
Well, I want you to finish your thing. This is like the 4th time I've heard you, and so I really have some good questions this time. However, I'm going to let everybody ask their questions and I'll wait till the end. But I want you to totally finish your presentation and cap it off the way you think, and then we'll come back and address any questions.
Of course. And so in addition to the cannabinoids that we've been talking about, the CBD, the THC, the acid forms, cannabis also produces terpenes. More than 200 of them are possible in any given strain or cultivar of cannabis. The terpenes, you can kind of think of those as essential oils. They're basically the building blocks of essential oils that we get from other herbal plants. They provide the synergistic entourage effect that we talk about being optimal for medical cannabis. And it's the terpenes that really determine whether a cannabis product is stimulating and energizing, like what we call sativas, or if they're calming and sedative and couch lock, like we call indicas, or a hybrid, like a balance of the stimulating and sedative terpenes in any profile will give you more of a hybrid. So it's not too stimulating and not too sedative. You're Goldilocks, you're right in the middle where you want to be. These terpenes, in addition to driving the sativa or indica categorization of a cannabis strain, also have medical benefits in their own right. And so, for example, we have myrcene, which is I think it's the most common terpene produced by cannabis. It is also found in mangoes, and it actually helps the cannabinoids cross the blood-brain barrier. So great for any condition that is happening in the brain, whether it be seizures or mental health or TBI or seizures. All of those might benefit from myrcene in a cannabis profile. Myrcene is also anti-inflammatory, anti-seizure, and can be sedative in higher concentrations. Then we have beta-caryophyllene, which is one of my personal favorites. It's also found, it's a really strong smelling terpene. It's also found in cloves and black pepper. Beta-caryophyllene is unique because even though it's a terpene, it acts like a cannabinoid. It interacts with the CB2 receptor as an agonist. So it'll activate that receptor, which can bring anti-inflammatory and anti-proliferative effects. It's a great alternative to CBG, which is a cannabinoid that acts the same way on that CB2 receptor. CBG is very stimulating. For me, it replaced coffee in the morning, not intoxicating. But some people, especially with things like anxiety, don't tolerate stimulants very well. And so beta-caryophyllene is a great alternative to CBG to get that CB2 agonism effect, which can benefit the gut and the immune system and inflammation and cancer without the stimulation. It tends to be more neutral to sedative with the beta-caryophyllene. And because it interacts with the cannabinoid receptor, we call it cannabinomimetic is the term we use for that. Makes it very unique. The next one is terpene I want to look at is linalool. Linalool is also found in lavender. And just like lavender, it will promote a sedative effect of a cannabis strain. It is supported by research for reducing anxiety. And it's also supported by research as an anti-seizure. So for a patient that it comes to me with epilepsy, I'm probably going to recommend a CBD product because CBD has anti-seizure research with myrcene in it to help cross the blood-brain barrier, and it has anti-seizure benefits, and linalool, which has anti-seizure benefits. So this is one of the ways where we can take a cannabis profile that, like I said, 165 cannabinoids, 200 terpenes, mix and match limitless combinations, and really kind of hone it in and help a patient find a product that really fits their situation instead of the eeny, meeny, miny, mo method, right? Which is probably, if they're really, really lucky, they might get something that works somewhat, versus this combination is actually supported by research, supported by patient outcomes for that condition. Very different approach. Then we have limonene, which is found in a lot of citrus fruits, lemon and grapefruit. It's mood elevating, it's energizing, it's motivating. I'm sorry, I don't know why I keep hitting that. It's also anti-cancer. And so this is a good one for somebody that has depression and needs that motivation and needs that mood elevation, needs that energizing effect. Or cancer, which can be exhausting. It can help somebody with cancer have a little bit more energy to go about their day. And then we have pinene, which is found in pine trees, which I'm actually an herbalist student this year and learning about the benefits of pine needle oil. It can be energizing, it can be anti-inflammatory, it can help with focus and attention if somebody has ADD or ADHD, and obviously found in pine trees. So those are just some of the terpenes and how we might use them to really target somebody's specific needs. Or even avoid if it's the opposite of what they need. For example, limonene might not be a fit for somebody with anxiety because it is really stimulating and energizing. And so all of these things kind of come into consideration with a medical approach with a patient to help them find a product that's going to be a good fit for them. And then we talked a little bit about the genetic testing, but this is the future of cannabis therapy, I believe. Really focusing on the individual approaches. There's no one size fits all, making sure that the variations in the components are needed by an individual, that we find those, we teach them, we support them, we guide them, recognizing that the responses are going to vary by the individual and that some experimentation might be necessary. Like I said, we have a goal of reducing the length of that experimentation through this medical approach and the assessment and really trying to mix and match the product with the patient as best as we can. Even then, it's not always 100% match the first time. There can still be some trial and error involved. I wrote a paper. It's on my Media Kit website. There's a link to it called Rationale for Genetically Guided Cannabis Therapy that dives right into the research on this topic and how there's genetic overlap between different pathways in the body that we can utilize to help somebody find their best product. So it really is the basis of all of this is epigenetics, which is the fact that our genetics are not this solid, unchanging aspect in our body. Like some people kind of believe that genetics are what they are and they can never be changed. When realistically, we've learned that there's this thing called epigenetics, which is the environmental impact on genetic expression, that our genes actually have an on and off light switch, if you will. And that if you are predisposed to something like heart disease, but you exercise regularly and your diet is optimal and you're taking care of your stress, you might actually turn off that genetic predisposition to heart disease by having a really optimal lifestyle and environment. And this goes with both positive influences and negative influences, where you may not be super predisposed to something, but if you're not managing your stress and your diet is horrible and you're not exercising, those would be negative influences that might actually turn a predisposition on for you. And so it just recognizes cannabis as an epigenetic factor, meaning it can come in and help to mitigate some of the predispositions to disease. Also recognizing that there are mutations that affect endocannabinoid system function, and that we can optimize pathways to improve cannabis outcomes. And this would be through diet and supplementation or herbal supplementation. And that some mutations are considerations or contraindications for cannabis therapy. The most famous probably being AKT1 mutation, which is a gene that actually predisposes schizophrenia. And so obviously if somebody has AKT1 mutation, when you assess, we're probably going to stay away from the THC for them because it could trigger schizophrenia for them. And so we're just getting to where we can use individual human genetics to guide a patient's cannabis therapy, which is pretty exciting. So I'm happy to nerd out with any of you that want to learn more about that. And I know Steve has gone through a genetic consult with me, so he's probably got a good grasp on some of those concepts already. And here's the bibliography, which, like I said, I sent this as a PDF, so you should be able to just click and open up any of these links that are supporting everything I've talked about in this presentation. So hopefully that's helpful for you guys that want to do a little deep dive. Any questions?
Okay, let's do it this way. If you have a question, please put an exclamation point in the chat. Okay, then I'm going to go down through and I'm going to go down through all the exclamation points and take first come, first served. If somebody's asking a question and Janna is on a topic and your question relates to that topic, while she's talking or while she's answering that question, put in 2 exclamation points next to it. If I see 2 exclamation points, I'll interrupt the order of questions, let you interact on that particular question. Then I'll go back to the 1 exclamation point marker and allow everybody to ask a question. And I have literally a page because I've been listening, because this is my 4th time with you, Janna.
Yeah.
So I'm starting to listen to the words. I think that there's a big issue here. Most people have been seduced by this big pharma idea that they can take a pill and get a solution, or smoke a joint and get a solution. And what you've been pointing out is that it's much more complicated than that. You showed a map of the cannabinoid receptors in the human body. I'd like to come back to that after we have a few questions. I want to talk about human beings and plants and how we're genetically, I've done some research. We have the same, human beings have 75% the same genes as pumpkins. Mm-hmm. Tomatoes actually have 7,000 more genes than we do. Bananas have 60% of our DNA, and everybody's heard about chimpanzees having 88, 89, 99.9% of human DNA. But all of us are related to plants. Amazingly discovered that lettuce has 99% of the DNA that human beings have. And we're just now getting to understand, as you pointed out, customizing an approach based on who I am, instead of just saying the system sucks and I'm going to rebel and I'm going to smoke a joint. I think what you're offering to us is a really way to see our bodies as sacred, see plants as sacred, and see how we can have a sacred interrelationship. That's why I'm so excited about what you're presenting here. So I'm going to be quiet on the rest of things. And I'm going to go back. I'm looking right now for exclamation points. If you have a question for Janna, put an exclamation point in the chat. If you don't, I'm going to ask the next question.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions in the chat too. Do you want me to read them off and address them, or do you want?
If they're there, that's fine. Go ahead. And then if Janna is addressing your question, please interact with her and do your own follow-up so that we get complete answers to these questions. I see Jill has got something in there.
Okay, yeah, and I think the first question that I'm seeing is from Mel, and it said, is cannabis safe to be smoked on a daily basis? Safe, yes. Smoking is not what I would recommend for optimal therapeutic use. I think, there are benefits to inhaled cannabis as a route of administration. It kicks in immediately and it wears off quickly. And so it can be really great if you have a migraine headache that's ramping up and you can feel the aura and it's coming on strong, inhalation can stop it very quickly. Smoking is the least clean way to take cannabis. And so oftentimes for inhalation, I will recommend vaping instead. You can vaporize it, and the vapor that comes off of a vape device is much cleaner than actually hitting it with a lighter and combusting it, which is going to bring you toxins as well as the cannabinoids that you're after. So that would be my suggestion. Although we do have research supporting that even daily cannabis smokers that are combusting it with a lighter have reduced risk of lung cancer, not increased. And that even if cigarette smokers add cannabis to their smoking regimen, it actually reduces the risk of lung cancer. So in that way, that's why I say it is safe. I just think there's more optimal, cleaner ways to inhale cannabis. And I normally recommend either a Volcano, which is a kind of a tabletop vape device, or I have a little handheld vape device you can put flour in. That's the best way to do it, is with lab tested flour, it's clean. I don't trust all of the vape cartridge ingredients, so be very wary of those. It's worth investing in a device that can vape flour that has been lab tested, so it's clean, it's safe. Hopefully that answered your question, Mel.
Any other questions about smoking? I have a couple notations about it. So while you're gathering your questions about smoking, put that double exclamation point down there, or just be ready to interrupt. Because you talked about having the whole cannabis plant, because it's a system, it doesn't just deliver a targeted molecule, right? And so talk about that in relationship to smoking, because it seems to me that smoking provides the whole plant. So there's that benefit, but and it avoids the pitfalls of a targeted thing. You want to talk about smoking? A lot of people here smoke and they're trying to use reasons to justify their smoking. I want them to smoke when it's appropriate. So anything you can say on that would be helpful.
Yeah, and like I said, I think smoking is safe. As far as getting the whole plant, smoking is also not optimal that way. Simply because you're combusting plant material that has hundreds of compounds in it that all have different temperature thresholds. So you're inevitably going to lose some of what's in that flower because of the temperature variances, and also because it's also hard to dose because you lose so much to air. So it's hard to know what one inhale is as far as milligrams of THC. I assume that's what you're smoking. I don't know why people would smoke anything else, but yeah, so you do lose some of the compounds that way. That said, if it's a weighing like I need immediate onset of something, and it's either take a smoke inhalation off of my pipe or my bong using combustion versus taking an opioid, smoking is still far safer. So it really is based on your situation. Vaping is going to give you a lot of the same benefits as smoking. Most of these devices have temperature gauges or heat gauges that you can adjust, so you can reduce the temperature and get more of those beneficial compounds that way. So there are several advantages to vaping over smoking. So that if you're looking to improve your health and take cannabis in a more health cognizant way, I would try to switch to vaping.
Cool. I love that. In fact, what I'd love to see, if we have time, if you have time, develop a chart, because I think the immediate relief that comes through that vaping, it could offset waiting till I get my prescription. So I have an issue now, and these people on this call are medicine people. They have someone comes to them with an issue now. Vaping is the answer until you get a prescription. And it'd be cool if we said, okay, here's what the temperature to set at to get this benefit. And if we had that chart already, then our medicine people would be prepared to give a specific answer.
And for the purpose of ceremony, I understand I'm learning more about my native culture and my ancestry, which goes way back. And just starting to delve more into that and really get a better sense of the uses. And I understand the importance of ceremony, and sometimes that includes using a pipe and smoking it. I could see that being acceptable, just because it's going to honor those traditions as well. I don't think there's any reason not to do that, but I think if you're doing it every day, you probably would benefit from switching to vape for those purposes other than ceremony. And I've been talking to one of my native mentors here, and and I understand there's the peyote ceremony. We don't yet know how peyote and cannabis might interact. And so I wouldn't suggest combining those ceremonies, but I could see, a cannabis ceremony fitting really well into like a healing circle that they do at a powwow, because you already have all of these people that are surrounded and being enveloped in healing intent. And so I think that would be a really great way to integrate cannabis as a ceremony, personally.
Do you have a recommendation of how many hours or days between use of a plant like peyote and then cannabis, or cannabis and then peyote? Do you have a moratorium period where to make sure the system's cleaned out for maximum?
And if there's somebody on the call that knows peyote and understands, it's really just about the duration of action. Inhaled cannabis kicks in quickly, wears off quickly. I understand that. It's 2 to 3 hours usually. It's more about, I would probably want to wait until the peyote is worn off in the system before adding in the cannabis, just because we don't fully yet understand how they might interact.
Yeah.
We're just trying to figure that out right now with psilocybin. And there have been people that say you can benefit from taking oral cannabis before you take the psilocybin, and then it kind of eases the transition out of the psilocybin session somehow. But I know I don't want to assume that peyote is the same as psilocybin. So that's where I haven't found anyone that can answer that question for me yet. So maybe one of you can.
Good. And there is a spiritual aspect of this, like a reverence, so that if I'm mixing them on purpose and know what I'm doing, that's great. And if I don't know what I'm doing, there's a certain reverence about fasting, about abstinence, and about being prepared to take my next medicine with purity of intention, rather than just trying to get all the stuff in my system I can get. So there's that. There's a spiritual aspect as well. Lynn has made a couple of comments here. You might want to look in the chat and respond. He put 2 comments down below. If you see, I'm a purist, and then there's an ease of use. So if you want to address those, that would be cool.
Yes, and I'm also a purist, having been a grower, from early on in my cannabis journey as a patient. The plants are amazing, and And I tell a story. It's funny, a friend of mine who also grows at one point had said, you know, he does Reiki on his plants and he doesn't allow anybody in his grow because he feels like the human vibe can impact the plant. Like this plant is so sensitive. And I got to witness that firsthand in my grow. I was out there one day and my mother-in-law showed up and she was really upset. And she came in while I was working with these plants. I was cloning babies. And so I was snipping babies off the bottoms of mother plants and putting them in my cloner. Something I did every month for years. So, you know, very familiar with the process. She came in and she was upset and she was venting at me and even yelling at me and trying to like pull me into her drama, which I resisted for about 45 minutes. But she stood there and just talk, and so upset. And you know, every little baby clone I took while she was in the room died. There was nothing I could do to save them. So this plant is so integrally connected with our energies as humans. It's really super interesting. So yeah, Lynn, I'm a purist as well. Whole flower, pure grown, purely used, exactly. And the intent is so important. And the ease of use with symptom reduction. You know, this is why a lot of people use vapes or use inhalation methods because you can get immediate relief. And, you know, for my daughter with autism, we use a capsule in the morning that she swallows, a capsule at night that she swallows, drops throughout the day. But she's 21 now, but there's a week of every month in her menstrual cycle where she really struggles still. And she will ramp up behaviors so quickly. She has migraine headaches that come on just like a wave. And she will actually ask for her vape pen in those situations because it is immediate relief. And so this is how a lot of patients, you know, figure it out and kind of figure out what works without the medical process, even though that's far more optimal. It probably takes them longer, but it's because most people, when you think medical cannabis, they think you go to a dispensary and you get flower and you smoke it. They don't understand that there are more optimal ways to approach it as medicine. So yeah, so hopefully that addressed what you were saying, Lynn.
Cool. I don't see any other questions or even exclamation points. I have a few more questions before everybody goes though. Janna's website, I put the link to Janna's marketing website in the chat. And you guys, this is like a wealth of information. Janna, I'm going to take you off a share and share your website here. You guys need to go to jannachampagne.com and then click on the link that takes you to the media site and investigate her site. She's got so much cool stuff out there. This lady is an expert and we're honored to have her among us. So
And Jill had a question too, so I don't want to miss her.
Good.
Yeah, with these specific combinations of cannabis components, are these extracted, synthesized, and recombined, or do you have lists of strains that have desired combinations? Okay. The whole plant products that I certify as optimal therapeutic quality start with the whole flower, dried, cured, extracted with a solvent, a hydrocarbon solvent, ideally a 190 proof food grade ethanol that actually concentrates the cannabinoids and all of the compounds in that flower as closely to as nature is intended as possible. And there are some temperature guidelines that need to be followed and things like that to really hang on to most of those compounds. That concentrate is then diluted into a tincture. This is extra virgin olive oil. And then we look at the cannabinoid and the terpene profile to kind of determine best use. Is it sedative? Is it stimulating? What cannabinoids and terpenes does it have in it? What do those support, you know, through the research or through patient outcomes? And then in order to target them further, sometimes they will add just tiny amounts of additional terpenes or combine two strains that to get one strain that has high CBD and one strain that has high CBG, for example. And so they're recombined as whole plant concentrations to help target specific needs. It's an all natural process. It's, it's the way that herbs have been processed forever. I'm learning in my herbalism course now that ethanol is a great extract solvent. There's nothing that has been synthesized, and there's nothing that, and I guess they have been recombined. As far as a list of strains, I tend to not rely on the strain name to tell me what that profile might be. It might give you kind of a hint, but literally you can take the exact same genetic seed and have two different growers produce it and get two different profiles, just based on their growing processes or what they put in it or how they fed it or how they, what pesticides they used, how it was dried and cured. So there really is no way, there's no guarantee that a strain is going to have the profile that you want. This is why I tend to base my recommendations on an actual lab test on that product that shows cannabinoid and terpene content and rules out all the bad stuff, of course. So that makes sense.
Thank you, Jill, for putting in your double exclamation point and for reminding us to look upstairs. Janna's good. She wasn't going to leave you behind, and neither was I, actually, but Janna's good.
She said a second question. Hang on. Let's see. That was one. Was there another one, Jill?
Well, she said, interesting. So each batch is analyzed individually, even if it's from the same strain.
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
cool.
Absolutely.
And let me ask you, this distillation process that you talked about, it seemed to me a great ceremony would be for a medicine person to sit with a participant and actually go through that process of creating that distillation as part with all the energy of that person in that distillation process. That may not be plausible. How much time does it take to do that? And what do you think about that?
Well, it takes a lot longer to grow the flower than to extract it.
Okay.
The growing process is a minimum of 4 months from seed to harvest. And that there are strains that take much longer to actually ripen. So from seed to flower, where the flowers actually begin to produce, is usually at least 60 days. That's what we call the veg state. And then once the light changes to 12 hours of light, 12 hours of darkness, which of course happens naturally in August with outdoor, that's when the flowers begin. And the flower stage for some strains is only 45 days to fully ripen. And then for other strains, it can be up to 90 days to fully ripen. So that's the bigger part of it. And then you have the drying and the curing, which can be a week or two, depending on the environment and the humidity and the weather, all kinds of factors. But once you have dried, cured flower, you can make a concentrate of up to a gallon in about an hour and a half to 2 hours. So it's not a very lengthy process. The infusion process for the acid, you're not heating it, you're infusing it directly into the oil. I like to let that sit a minimum of 2 weeks. And I had some THCA I was infusing, and it kind of went to the back of my closet shelf and forgot about it for about 4 months. It was the most amazing tincture. It was almost like a nectar. It was so beautiful. So, that kind of gives you an idea on the timeframes, and I'm happy to share my recipes with you. If any of you want to try to make any of these products, I have a written recipe for THCA infusions. The ethanol extractions are a little trickier just because ethanol as it evaporates is very, very flammable. So you have to be careful. I actually use a machine called the green oil machine that keeps it all enclosed, and it actually redistills the alcohol evaporate and spares it for next time. So it really saves on the price too. It's like a $300 machine, but you save that on ethanol if you're making any amount. It spares the ethanol, which would otherwise be lost to air and be flammable. So those are my favorite mechanisms.
Okay, Jill put another question there. So there is only one source doing this ? Where can we find more information about combinations? You mentioned you would provide recipes. Is there some more thing you want to answer to Jill there?
Well, so I'm actually part of this company. I've helped to formulate their products. It's unityformulas.com. It's CBD hemp So it's legal everywhere. They will accommodate custom blending and different compounds that aren't listed on the site, if that's helpful. And I have a 20% off coupon code you can use if you'd like to try any of these products. I know, Linda, your friend, did she ever try the pain product that you mentioned? No, she didn't try it. Okay. I was just looking for to see how it worked for her. But yeah, this is where you can find good targeted products that are also whole plant. I have a listing of many different companies on cannabisnurseapproved.com, which I'm putting in here as well. That also has article I wrote with all the research citations on the flow criteria. That has an open source list of producers that make whole plant. So if Unity Formulas doesn't resonate, you can look at some of the other ones as well. Unity is nice too, because they offer free nurse guidance. So if you're taking pharmaceuticals and you're not sure about combining them, you can sign up for a free call with a nurse that I have actually mentored and trained to help guide you that way. So that's a nice perk of that particular company as well. And I don't benefit from the sales of Unity Formulas, even though I helped come up with the recipes and I train the affiliates. They actually donate to my nonprofit Autism Safe Haven in exchange for my contribution. So I've been pretty much a stickler about not benefiting from the sales of products that I'm recommending to patients. So that kind of expands upon that.
And it's very consistent with our medicine person approach that no money or profit should be made from medicine. Other services are another thing, but when it comes to medicine, it's all spiritual and should not be compromised by a money transaction, right? Anybody can donate any amount they want. One of the things I was going to ask you was, like, I found an extreme benefit talking to you about my DNA profile. Janna actually took my 23andMe DNA profile and reviewed it and noticed where I was mutated, where I had some differences, what things I ought to be careful about, what supplements I should not take, and what I could take. Some of it was cannabinoid related, some of it was not cannabinoid related. This was even before Janna was a certified herbalist. So there's a lot, but that DNA analysis is still in baby mode. I mean, we really don't understand DNA, actually. We've coded it, but we don't know what the codes mean ultimately. And we don't understand how you brought up epigenetic code. And I want to bring this out, is that epigenetics means that environment can change which genes are turned on and which genes are turned off. Epigenetics is actually second chakra energy, whereas genes and DNA are first chakra energy. And as the energy moves up, we can actually mutate our own DNA by personal choice, not only behaviors and not only by what we eat, but through meditation and through emotional healing. These are very important aspects. And you're nodding your head yes. If you want to comment about epigenetics, I'd be glad to have you do that.
Sure. You're very correct, especially how we don't know, we're just scratching the surface, both with cannabis science and cannabinoid science and with genetic science. And just the recognition of that as humans, there's still so much we don't know. We have a grasp on some things, and we're learning through this research that continues to emerge how we might utilize the knowledge we do have to benefit patients and benefit health and build upon that. But we still have so much to learn.
Yeah.
So, epigenetics, I think I first started looking at epigenetics and nutrigenomics, which is genetically guided nutrition and supplementation and herbal medicine, in 2008. So very recent in the grand scheme of things. I started looking at it for my daughter with autism to see if there was anything I could do to help optimize her health. It is just such a fascinating approach, and just recognizing that we still have so much to learn, which is it's a great combination for me personally to be in these industries, because I have hungry brain. I'm constantly wanting to learn more knowledge and understand the why, really dig to the depth of it, and try to understand it as a whole. And so, yeah, it's definitely a trailblazing industry. Both are still, because we
Cool.
still have so much to learn.
I spelled nutrigenomics in the chat. Did I spell it right?
That is correct. Yep.
All right, wonderful. Can you send me the PDF of the cancer research you talked about so that I can keep it on file and send it out to those people just anytime in your convenience? Just make a note for yourself.
Yeah, and if there's anything else I referenced and you're not quite sure, because I referenced a couple of my textbooks, and there, of course, a lot of information. If there's anything specific where somebody wants just a study on something, I'm happy to find that and furnish that as well. So
Lynn put in something about nootropics, nootropics, nootropics.
nootropics.
I never heard of that.
Yeah, I was trying to see if I could. I don't think I can connect a PDF into the chat, but I can send it out to the group.
You actually can do it, but just send it to me and it'll be available. I will post it in the YouTube with this training, with this recording. I'll put the PDF file, a reference, link it so that it's available if anybody wants it. Okay.
Happy
And
to
then,
do that.
and then get clear on Lynn's question. Thoughts on the impact of nootropics and enhanced athletic performance perspective? Any info on studies being done with crossover therapy?
There are, and so there is a close link between the endocannabinoid system and fitness health. And in fact, the anandamide, which is one of our endocannabinoids we produce, is responsible for the runner's high. There are also studies supporting that cannabis therapy can help improve exercise recovery and the stress from that, not to mention mitigating pain and inflammation during exercise. And so, there are some gyms that are opening up that are really highlighting, athletes that like to use cannabis. So it is an interesting trend, and I think there is something to it.
Cool. Any other comments or questions from anybody else before I take up a couple more questions here? I just, you're such a resource, Janna, that you schedule time for us is wonderful. And we're now approaching a third, the second hour. So I want to be careful of your time. You talked about some really important aspects about the use of cannabis. I think Linda is really going to be, want to come out very clearly making a policy about reference to marijuana versus to cannabis, and come out of the street lingo and get into the scientific aspect of exactly what the benefits are. So I think more is going to come from that. That said, is there any way that I, as a medicine person or as a consultant for a participant, is there any way that I can notice any kind of psychological dependency on marijuana, there I said it, on cannabinoids? Is there any way that I can tell that, hey, there seems to be a psychological dependency even here, even though you're clearly stating there's not the physical dependency of other kinds of stimulants and depressants? You mentioned that some cannabinoids are stimulants and some are depressants. What are some good signs that the person I'm talking to has a psychological dependency? Can you comment on that?
Sure. And the cannabis use disorder DSM, which I mentioned in the presentation, is a good resource for some of those things. It probes whether somebody's function has been impaired, whether they are procrastinating on vital duties, or for work or for life, that they are avoiding and using the cannabis to be comfortable in that avoidance or that escapism tendency. And so those are some of the red flags I would look out for. It really does take an assessment by a knowledgeable medical professional to determine whether somebody has cannabis use disorder. Because, we have to remember that patients are largely left to their own devices when it comes to figuring out what cannabis medicine to try, how to use it, how often to use it, what might be best. And so a patient who really has medical use in mind but doesn't have that guidance can certainly fall into some of those criteria, because they think, oh, cannabis is THC is what I need, and use it all day, every day. Well, that's probably going to impair their function. But if they're really looking for medical optimal outcomes, that would be improved function, which would mean guidance and making sure they understand to use the non-intoxicating compounds during the day whenever possible or probable or indicated, that are going to really reduce some of those escapism tendencies that are possible with THC. That makes sense.
Yeah. I just want to say that Richard Davidson is a Harvard professor at Harvard. He wrote a book years ago in 2005 about meditation and how in a meditative process, a person can observe pain and realize that it's not just pain. Realize that there are many aspects to the pain. And so if I'm mindful, that's why I teach mindfulness. If I'm mindful, I can sit and observe exactly what's going on here. What is the source of what's going to solidify as what I used to call pain? And I can observe its individual parts. Sitting, stopping, and observing has great merit on this. And as I observe each solidification, I can then decide if it's a medical issue or if it's a psychological issue. So sitting and being with myself, there's mindful stress reduction. There are 3 or 4 classes of meditation that Harvard has done. This started back in 2005 with the Dalai Lama and some of his people, and it's been continuing research. And so the more we understand the mind, the brain, and human choice and epigenetics, it all integrates. One of the things I think we forget is we separate ourselves from plants. And yet genetically, we're quite similar to plants. And when I saw your cannabinoid map, your of the places in the body, I almost saw acupuncture points, right? I mean, they're here and there, they're everywhere. And I am a plant, And so let's use the plants. They're sacred. Creator gave them to us. Cool. Lynn I don't know why Lynn doesn't talk here, but he threw in Jill added in a website to Paul Stamets, and Paul, the Stamets, that family has been huge in psilocybin and mushrooms. Actually, I did a little thing here is that we are more like mushrooms. Chimpanzees and bonobos are a lot, and humans are a lot like mushrooms. We come from the same genetic evolutionary tree. Mushrooms are down there. Our brains could well be mushroom maps, fungi maps in our brains. So we really have a sacred and beautiful relationship with plants. I'm so grateful you're here to share all this with us. And now let's get to Lynn Decker's thing here. Any opinion from a physician point of view on how people use it in spiritual purpose, prayers, and meditation? See, I just was talking about that. And he says, yes, exactly, Steve. But if you want to comment on meditation, prayer, and spiritual preparation before we embrace a sacred plant, if any comments you want to make, please.
Yeah. And just to reference back, it's the importance of ceremony. It's the importance of intent. It's the importance of that mindfulness before taking anything that's therapeutic, to really enhance its benefits, right? And enhance the experience and enhance the outcomes. And like I said, there's a nurse student of mine. She took my college course, and I've been mentoring her a couple of years. Ariane is her name. And she has begun doing these workshops where she will sit with people and connect with them and connect them into their intent for use of both cannabis and psilocybin and different psychedelics. And she has even found that, with intent, the psychedelic effect of cannabis can be really potentiated for someone, even without using the psilocybin or the peyote or the MDMA or whatever else it might be. So that piece is so important, and making sure that we're connecting that in. That intent is really going to drive our experience. It's going to drive the benefits of that plant. And as far as spiritually, I feel like for myself, it was such a huge piece of my spiritual evolution, because when you're in a place where you're physically painful, where you're emotionally and mentally traumatized, where you're trying to heal all of those things, you can kind of get entangled. And the cannabis use, even though in my mind, I was using it for physical pain, my intent was not spiritual growth or spiritual evolution. But when your physical ease returns, that is going to allow you more focus on spiritual growth. When your trauma eases and your memories of those painful times ease, that can help you start evolving into, retrospectively finding purpose in your trauma, finding the reason why you had to experience those things and how you were able to grow from those things, and how you could take that information you learned and apply it moving forward. That was one of the things that was probably the most therapeutic for me, was taking these experiences that were extraordinarily traumatic. And we didn't really get into that, but I've suffered a lot of trauma in the last decade. But finding the purpose in that trauma, and not even just the purpose, but also using what I learned to help others. To me, that was the most therapeutic thing in my last decade of experience. So it can really get you through some of those difficult times, bring you back to homeostasis and health. And when you're physically not having all of these distractions from your pain and your imbalances and your disease and the stress that that can bring, it can really facilitate more focus on your spiritual growth.
Lynn comments, I don't know why he's not talking, feels like a very heart-oriented relationship, or am I the only one who has experienced the nature of medicine that way? Has helped me process some very difficult experiences.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to suggest right now, Linda, maybe you can comment on this, but if someone's going to take cannabis, or if they're going to microdose, or peyote, or psilocybin, if they have a regimen with their medicine person, if they journal I'm doing my ceremony today, I'm doing my micro ceremony today, and then report back to their medicine person that process, because there's that spiritual connection, that intentional connection, that mindful connection. And journaling is very powerful because it's a it integrates my thought with my physiology when I write in a journal, and that kind of thing can enhance the sacred nature of it. And Linda, you turned on your mic. I can hear the distortion. I'm going to mute, and you go ahead and comment on that, Linda.
So I actually have a journal that I recommend, because journaling is so critical with integration. And the reason we do any ceremony is to integrate it into our life. If we do ceremony and we don't integrate, then we just had a good experience. So integration is, in my opinion, why we do ceremony. And that happens the minute we step out of ceremony. That's when the process begins. And if integration is mindful, it is ongoing. And thank you, Janna. I am a beginner, and I know nothing, because I will be 77, and I've had a lot of domesticated information, and I will be calling you. So I am very interested in hearing all feedback. And Steve, I'm kind of mad at you that you didn't include me, and you're working with Janna. So I feel like this is the beginning.
Yeah.
And Lynn has found this fascinating, and he has a company called Green Buffalo, and I know how much he knows, and I value his opinion, and he's been fascinated. So you're all welcome to send me feedback, and we're now at 8:03, so I think it's time for us to close this call. And
I have one more thing. Janna, can people take your college course and get continuing education credit from some university?
They can get college credits, yes.
So our medicine people could take your college course and get continuing education credit from their education.
Yeah, they're college credits.
Yeah, college credits. Beautiful. That was my final question or comment. I have several more, but I'm going to contact you on the side. Okay, go ahead, Linda, you can close the meeting if you want. I'd like to hear takeaways from those who are still here, because Jill has been very active. Lynn has been very active. I know Mel, she jumped in once there. If any of you have any takeaways or comments that you want to share, just open up your mic and do it, because Janna would love the feedback, and those who listen to this in the future will love to hear your takeaways. So please, Mel and Lynn and Jill, let's share.
Thank you, Linda, for your feedback. I appreciate it. And please reach out anytime.
If Lindsay is still on, I'd like to hear from her, and just any and all of you.
Yeah, Lindsay's not here. So Mel, do you want to share?
Yeah, I thought this was really just very informative and good to hear. This is a medicine that I don't use very often, but every now and again, and I found benefits for it when I've needed it. It's helped me connect closer to my children and got me out of my headspace and ego space to just calm down and just connect. I feel like sometimes my kids have felt safer. Like my little sensitive boy has been able to feel it when like he could open up to me because he just felt I was safe. So it's been interesting, but I do have some friends and people close to me that use it like on a daily basis. And I just didn't know, because I try to be really healthy and careful with things I take. So that's why I was just, it's good to hear like, okay, it is okay. And I don't have to stress about there being some like long-term effects of hurting the lungs or having some big health issues, maybe 20, 30 years down the road. It kind of eased my, I guess, stresses with that. And then you recommended maybe better ways to take it versus the smoking it. Anyway, so it was really helpful. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Cool.
So, if somebody has endocannabinoid deficiency, they benefit from daily use. So it's really for somebody that's not using it medically or not needing it. I think daily use could be too much of a good thing for sure. But if somebody's using it daily, they're probably self-medicating something, right? And there was a really interesting retrospective study done. Dr. David Allen talked about this. He has a little 3-minute video. I'm happy to provide that as well. And this retrospective study, they looked at, they had one group of people that had been smoking cannabis for 20 years and another group that had not. And in the cannabis smokers, not only did they find that their lungs were healthy and otherwise their health was pretty good, they also had an 80% less incidence of diabetes. So to me, this really supports that smoking does come with medical benefits, even if somebody's not thinking that way. If they're just thinking, oh, I want some stress relief and to relax or replace my alcohol or whatever that might be, they still get medical benefits. It still protects the pancreas from oxidative stress and reduces their prevalence of diabetes. So, yeah, we haven't found anything saying it would be harmful. So that's where we're at.
And so at the risk of being redundant, Mel, are you done? I don't want to interrupt anybody. Okay, good. She's done. How do you determine cannabis deficiencies? Because I get that our soil is depleted. We're not getting the minerals. We're not getting the proper vitamin and replenishment from our foods. Even though I eat all organic, I don't know if they had how good their soil was, even though it has an organic label on it. And so I do have some deficiencies. Plus I have genetic issues that create potential deficiencies, even in a normalized situation. So how do I know if I'm cannabinoid deficient?
Well, one telltale sign that somebody has endocannabinoid deficiency is that they have chronic illness. They have a diagnosis. But realistically, we know cannabinoids are vital nutrients. If somebody's not getting enough omega fatty acids, they're probably ECS deficient. And we need to look historically. I didn't touch on this piece, but historically, hemp was a renewable resource that founded this country. Our Constitution was written on hemp paper.
Yeah.
George Washington at one point was giving away 40 acres as long as they would grow hemp on it, because it was good for so many things, which is part of why it was demonized and made inaccessible, because it competes with paper and concrete and building materials and oil and gas and nutrition.
And cotton.
Cotton, yeah, textiles, animal feed.
Hemp fruit is
Yes.
hemp root is one of the most nutritious things we could eat, and you can't even buy it.
Yep. And so we used to feed hemp to our animals, to our chickens and to our cows and our pigs. And so we had cannabinoids in our meat and our milk and our eggs as part of a normal diet before hemp was removed as animal feed. So, you know, I go back to the wisdom of the ancients and the fact that they knew this was benefiting not only the animals, but the people that consume those animal products. And our diets have been largely deficient of cannabinoid, either in our food or as medicine for almost a century. And look what happened to our health in this country during that time. We have an explosion of chronic illness, not just in adults or elderly, but in children. So I think
Animals.
and animals too. When you look at it from that perspective, I think it's really apparent that pretty much everybody that's not supplementing is probably cannabinoid deficient.
Cool. So Jill, you've commented whoop, you just tried to tweak out of me. You've commented a couple times. Do you have any comment, takeaway, anything you'd like to say to Janna before we go?
Yeah. Hi, Janna. I'm Jill. Thank you so much for doing this. I actually became a botanist because of cannabis and how it changed my life and helped me with anxiety and a myriad of other problems. I was a recreational user. I was just a college kid, you know, and I noticed it helped me with my exercise-induced asthma. It helped me to like relax. It also helped with psychosomatic gallbladder issue that I had. So many things. Anyways, fast forward to today, I don't grow it professionally anymore, but I do grow a few in my backyard every once in a while. And I have a question about throwing the leaves in smoothies because I do that once in a while.
Yeah, very
And
good THCA.
okay.
Yeah, that's what I tell people to do with their male plants is strip the leaves, throw them in the freezer, and then you can pull them out and juice them or blend them whenever you want them. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Whenever I just trimmed them in their veg state, I just make a nice green smoothie that day for whatever.
Thanks.
And yeah, so I don't know much about any of the science of what you went over today. So that was really, really great and enlightening. Thank you for that. And really interesting that we can really hone those different components to really meet our needs. And yeah, thank you for sharing your knowledge. And I can only imagine what a blessing it has been having a child that you can actually help with this knowledge. And that is just so cool.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like I said, I'm very passionate. I don't think, you know, people will call and say, oh my gosh, this administration outcome. And I'm like, it doesn't surprise me anymore.
Mhm.
Cancer disappears. Yeah, that happens. The cannabis plant, in addition to the cannabinoids and the terpenes, which we talked about today, it also has antioxidants, bioflavonoids, essential fatty acids, chlorophyll. It has all these beautiful ingredients that really support our health nutritionally, in addition to those cannabinoids and terpenes that we focus on medically. So it's a great supplement to add to your smoothie. It's perfect.
Yeah. And no psychoactive if you're not cooking it. So
You know what? I've actually noticed, well, I had somebody report to me that if you blend it too long and heat it, it can become psychoactive.
oh, okay, that's good to know.
So if you're really pissed off one day, if you're really pissed off, Jill, just keep it in the blender for a while, get it a little bit hot. Then you
There we go. I didn't smoke today, I swear. Oh, that's brilliant.
Are you complete then, Jill?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for engaging through the chat and insisting that we get your questions answered. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Nathan put a comment out here. He says, prayers and medicine with native tobacco, cannabis and peyote are separate times. So he believes in that separation. One of my friends got cured from nicotine through cannabis, he says. Nathan, if you're out there, I know you said you want to take care of your kids, but if you want to unmute and comment or say anything, you sure can, but I just read your comment. It's up to you. And if Nathan's not going to say anything, then Nikki, you've been real quiet during this. Do you have any comments or questions?
Yeah, and with my delving into herbalism and Native American culture and my heritage, I just began growing tobacco this year. I have 2 tobacco plants up and some angelica root, ignish, I think they call it in the local tribe here. And I've connected with a local nurse mentor of mine. She was my first mentor in nursing school as a nurse of 45 years. She's also a Native American healer and medicine woman. And so she's going to start taking me on some herb walks and showing me, you know, where different herbs are located and how to reverently harvest them and things like that. So I'm just so excited. It's a whole new chapter. And it's funny that cannabis was my gateway to exploring other herbal medicine plants. So pretty fun. On there, it looks like Nathan's off mute.
Oh, yes, it's been a great conversation and everything like that. And of course, you know, like my friend, as I mentioned, he was a Sundance leader and things like that. He was addicted to tobacco, nicotine for many years. And he asked me to pray for him, and he grows hemp and all that. So that's what he does now. He doesn't smoke anymore like that and whatnot. And I believe there's a lot of possibilities of helping people. He helps a lot of people that have third, what's it called, that like prostate cancer, like they're at the 3rd and 4th stage, and it's he's having a lot of success helping people. So it's all good. So I appreciate each and every one of you all, and I'm glad I could make it here for a bit. My phone kind of gets stuck sometimes, but many blessings to each and every one of you all. The Goyak means yes, blessings. Thank you. I'm complete. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan.
Welcome.
So Lynn, would you like to comment?
Hey there. I'm actually still here. I'm just out on a trail, so forgive me. Sure, I'll just comment. I loved the presentation, and thank you all so much. And being a part of this and learning, I think, is such a valuable and important part of how we're transforming as a community. And I think this is powerful medicine for us to continue to even better inform the people that we're helping with medicine, and being better informed to be able to help them correctly. And I think that's a lot of what some of the message is, you know, even appropriate alignment of values, but also proper medicine use and dosing and everything else that follows, you know, the very best medicine and research that we have. And that's a valuable tool for us too. So thank you for including me in the conversation. I'm a longtime researcher and clinical researcher as well. And I love learning more and more about all that the plant is and all that we're learning about it. There's a lot of new research coming out too. So it's fascinating. Thank you all. Aho.
Uh-oh.
And let me know if there's anything, Nathan, that I can provide to you research-wise. If you want to do a deeper dive into anything, I'm happy to do that. So I was trying to, you know, have it layman enough that everybody could understand, but also, you know, throw in some pearls for those of us with the scientific minds. So hopefully that was helpful.
Cool. Is everybody complete so far?
I just
Mel,
wanted to ask if there's like an age that you recommend before getting into this, you know, like if you have any feedback on that.
An age?
Yeah, like an age, like
For
if there's
children.
a teenager that's struggling with some issues, are you like, well, maybe they should be over 20? Like, I just didn't know anything about that while their brains developing.
Yeah, THC definitely has some considerations around lifespan and age of the patient. Like I said, we would only use THC if it was something that was severe enough that the risk of THC was less than the risk of not treating, like cancer, autism rages, things like that. Even mental health and you know, suicide, some of that. But CBD and the hemp products are safe at any age. So you can start in infancy. And historically, we use cannabis throughout the lifespan for the last 5,000 years, from newborn to end of life. So, you know, I would be careful with the THC. And if you have a specific child in mind, pediatrics was one of my specialties in the cannabis space as a nurse. So I'm happy to, you know, to run a case study with you if you want to, you know, connect and tell me some detail about this person that you might have in mind. It can be great for kids with anxiety, kids with depression, kids with any kind of mental health, you know, kids that have pain syndromes, things like that. You know, CBD is such a good all around tool for children's health. So, you know, there's a lot there that could potentially be utilized that wouldn't represent any risk factors for a child or an adolescent. So,
What cannabinoid is in breast milk?
anandamide. So it's our endocannabinoid that we produce that is synonymous with THC from the plant.
Cool.
Even so, there's this gray area of research. And I try to listen to it, even when we have contradicting research. It says it's fine for THC in childhood and adolescence. We have other research that suggests it could trigger schizophrenia for those that are predisposed. It could cause neurodevelopmental issues for other children, even if they don't have the schizophrenia predisposition. So it's weighing that risk factor of using THC specifically with a child versus what we're treating and how might it benefit. And so it's just weighing that out objectively is kind of how we approach it when there's a child that might benefit. But CBD, CBG, CBN, THCA, the acids, there's so many cannabinoids that are completely safe for use, infant, child, adolescent, throughout that lifespan.
Okay, I've asked Nikki to unmute a couple of times, and I think that she's here but disposed. Does anybody else have any other comments? I'm grateful for you being here, and thank everybody for sharing your takeaways. Linda, do you want to have a final communication with Janna and sign off? And Janna, I'm so grateful.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
And Linda, in my defense, as soon as I met Janna, I told you about her. And that conversation's been ongoing. I was not withholding anything, okay?
I just didn't know. I would have loved to have learned more and not be the beginning student tonight.
Well, I actually have a recording of my DNA profile evaluation. I'm not going to share it with everybody, Linda, but I would share it with you if you want to hear what you said about that. All right, I'll do that. So are we complete then? Janna, you want to give us one final farewell?
Well, thank you everybody for being here and for being open-minded enough to listen to the messages. I hope you all gleaned some knowledge tonight. This is recorded, so I think Steve's probably going to put that out if anybody wants to re-listen to it. I do talk fast, and I presented a lot of information tonight, so don't feel badly if you're feeling a little overwhelmed or not sure. If you watch this after the fact and come up with questions, or you want to request specific research studies to support something that I stated, please feel free to reach out. I'm also going to reply to the group and provide that 1972 NIH research on THC as an anti-cancer apoptosis producing compound, and the Dr. David Allen video. If there's anything else you guys can think of right now, I'll attach it to that email and get it sent off. Just let me know. You can write it in the chat or pop on, either way.
And I will include it in the YouTube video. So
Perfect.
You send it out to everybody that you want to. You know, I kind of prefer that only those who attend the call. So if you want to send it to me, then I'll put it in the thing, and the people who have I'll put it in a YouTube thing, and those people who have the desire to access is good. If you want to send it to everybody, that's fine too. Just I find a lot of people, I don't know. I like commitment.
All, so either way.
I like commitment.
Okay.
Cool. Okay, Linda, you want to sign off?
Fine. Thank you, and for the extra hour, and thank everyone for staying, and I love you all.
Thank you, Linda. To you. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Janna.
Good night.
Bye.
You're my hero, Janna. Talk to you later. Bye, Nathan. Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone. Wish to go out good ways.